Hey, hope you had a great weekend, and thank you for taking 10 minutes to get up to speed on current events. I'm Carl Azus for CNN Student News. First up, a papal trip across the sea. Pope Francis traveled from the Vatican to the Caribbean nation of Cuba over the weekend. This is a significant visit. Pope Francis is the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. It's the largest denomination of the world's largest religion, Christianity. And for decades, Cuba's government has been officially atheist. It's had a number of restrictions on religion. The Pope said that the Catholic Church was once an important part of Cuban history, and he called for Cuba's government to give people the freedom, the means, and the space to practice their faith. He also called on Cuba to open itself to the world. The Pope's visit included a mass with tens of thousands of people yesterday and a private meeting with Cuba's former leader, Fidel Castro. The pontiff plans to spend today traveling through Cuba and then fly to the U.S. capital tomorrow. Like Cuba, China is a communist country, and like Cuba, China's had a history of tensions with the U.S. Its leader, Xi Jinping, is visiting America this week. It'll be his first trip here as Chinese president, though he has been to the U.S. before. President Xi is scheduled to speak to business leaders and international diplomats in Seattle, Washington tomorrow. Later in the week, he'll be in Washington, D.C. for meetings with President Obama. That includes a state dinner at the White House, a formal meal and high honor for U.S. presidential guests. President Xi leads a country that's both a U.S. ally and a rival.
Are the U.S. and China friends or enemies? Even some of the stodgiest diplomats will, for lack of a better term, use the word frenemies, because the fact is the truth is somewhere in between. Let's talk about what makes the two countries friends, and the first is economic. The U.S. is China's #1 trading partner. China is the U.S.'s #2 after only Canada. And just as a matter of comparison, the U.S. has more than 500 times the amount of trade in dollar terms with China as it had with the USSR. But there are other shared interests. One is counterterrorism. Another is non-proliferation. China was also a part of the Iran nuclear negotiations. A big one is climate change. And when I talk to even some of the toughest diplomats on both sides, they all agree on one thing. It's not in either country's interest to go to war with the other. But China and the U.S. have real and troubling and growing differences. One of them is cyber attack. For years, U.S. companies have accused China of stealing trade secrets to the loss of tens of billions of dollars. And the U.S. government has accused China of attacking the U.S. military and a whole host of U.S. institutions. The U.S. and China also have severe differences over territory. The U.S. opposes China's manufacture, in effect, of man-made islands hundreds of miles off of its coast. And other differences as well, including islands that both China and Japan claim. At the same time, the U.S. very concerned about the expansion of China's military and the expansion of where China's military is operating. We saw that when Chinese warships turned up off the coast of Alaska within U.S. territorial waters at the same time that President Obama was on the ground there. Bigger picture, the U.S. and Chinese systems are diametrically opposed. The U.S. is a democracy based on the rule of law. China is an authoritarian state where the law is essentially the Chinese Communist Party. So the challenge, and Chinese and U.S. diplomats talk about this all the time, is how to keep the peace between a rising power, China, and an existing power, the U.S. And historically, that's always been tough. Today, China talks a lot about a new kind of superpower relationship. The U.S. talks about its pivot to Asia. But the fact is, even the smartest diplomats on both sides haven't figured out a solution to this problem. And it is in all of our interests that they do.
The one U.S. state we haven't mentioned yet on our roll call this year is Connecticut, and it's Wintergreen Interdistrict Magnet School that leads things off. Hello to all of our viewers in Hamden, and thank you for watching. One city we've never announced in Mississippi is Picayune, and it's the Maroon Tide of Picayune Memorial High School that's on today's roll. And one country we've never announced before is United Arab Emirates. From Abu Dhabi, welcome the International School of Shu'afat. Pre-game medical assessments of players, examinations of those who take hard hits during the game, moving the kickoff spot forward 5 yards. These are some of the steps the National Football League says it has already taken to make the game safer. A recent study suggests measures like that and perhaps more are needed. It found that 87 out of 91 former NFL players had CTE.
Well, first of all, CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is a brain disease. It's a progressive brain disease for which we have no known treatment, no cure, and frankly, it's not something that we even knew about until 7 or 8 years ago. Research in this really began about in 2008. I had a chance to visit the lab in 2011 where this science was taking place, where they were examining the brains of former NFL players and other people as well. Now, this most recent study says 96% of people whose brains were examined had evidence of the CTE. And I want to make something clear here. These were people who probably during their lives worried that something was wrong and donated and had their brains donated to science after they died. So there was already some concern about it. There's no way to suggest that 96% of all NFL players will develop CTE. But there is obviously a lot of science here. And when you look at the brains of these people, what they found were these protein deposits that were very similar again to what you might see with Alzheimer's disease. In life, these people often had anger issues, depression, and memory loss. Those are the sort of constellation of symptoms that people often develop. And it was often younger players whose brains were still developing that may have been most at risk.
CTE is not limited to athletes. Anyone with repeated head trauma and concussions could develop it. As far as football goes, researchers don't know why some players develop CTE and others don't. But engineers are joining the effort to make the game safer. A high-tech tackling dummy that costs around $3,500 could help.
We've clocked in a 5-second 40-yard dash, which is pretty quick for a player.
It makes some quick cuts, too. It's pretty difficult to tackle.
We can turn it like a car. We can rotate in place. This is actually the first tackling dummy at any practice of this sort that can actually move and replicate player motion. You take one player out of any tackling at practice and you've already cut your injury risk by half because that player isn't standing there taking a hit.
Nice. How realistic is it in terms of like the real deal?
But talk to my players, it's identical. There's some subtleties, change of speed and so forth, it makes it like you're tackling something on the field. It's as close as you can get, short of tackling a real person.
Have you ever had a concussion yourself?
I had one my sophomore year of high school, and it's pretty scary. You know, you black out for a couple seconds. When I looked at that hit after the game, my explanation of that was like it's a freight train hitting a Volkswagen. My thing was, you know, not remembering. You know, I've been taking my daughters to practice for years, and all of a sudden, I forget how to get there. I have to ask my wife, how do you get there?
If you have multiple head injuries, you're at a higher risk for having longer-term consequences.
Do you see this device being a real tool in preventing concussions?
Yeah, I do. I really do.
Literally, you take half the equation out, 50% of the problem. When two guys collide, we remove one of them. So we can practice, and our technique is improving because we're doing it more frequently, but we're not jeopardizing ourselves or other players.
We've had huge players and teams contact us wanting to know when they can get their hands on one, and at this point all we're trying to say is we're developing it and we'll get them to you as soon as we can.
So teams from across the country are contacting you?
Across the world. Coaches want to protect their players. Players want to protect themselves, and more importantly, parents want to protect their young players.
Before we go, we're baking up something delicious and huge. A single apple pie that could serve 1,000 people. How? Well, I'll tell you. It's 7 feet long, it takes 6 hours to assemble and about 17 hours to bake. The prodigious pie packs 400 pounds of filling on top of 200 pounds of dough. So it might taste light and flaky, but it ain't. It's a traditional part of an apple festival in Indiana, though it'd be a great addition to Pie Day in March. We could give them 3.14 reasons for that. The Piled High Pie pieces together another episode of our show, allowing us to say goodbye before we say goodbye. It's not all, though. If you're hungry for more puns and roll call tips and you're already on Instagram, pie us a visit at instagram.com/CNN Student News.